Oh, Mary, don't you be don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you be don't you mourn because Carol's army got grounded. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary, don't you be don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you be don't you mourn because Carol's army got grounded. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Some of these things by 12 o'clock. This old world is gonna read and rock.
Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about 30 minutes of history together. My name is Jason Kishinev, and we're going to start Chapter 2 of Defining Moments in Black History by Dick Gregory, reading Between the Lies. Remember, if you enjoyed the episode, if you like what you hear, hit that like and subscribe button, and hit that notification bell because YouTube has been known to unsubscribe people. Shall we dig in? Let's shall. Chapter 2, Solidarity. The blurb at the beginning says, "Free people are the ones with enough money to control the information the rest of us get." A white boy told me in the 1960s, "Man, the worst dude on the planet is a liberal." I didn't say anything. He explained, "Yeah," he said, "a right-winger decides he's going to kill you. He takes his children to school every day and he goes by the coffee shop and blows his brains out if a black person comes in the door because he can't stand to see it integrated. But see, when a liberal decides he's going to kill you, he sees you go to a football game every Saturday and says, 'Let's blow up the stadium.' I don't know if this is true or pure crazy talk. Normally I would research a statement like this, but I don't really care. Seems his head is a little messed up. All white folks have to do is take a gorilla and spruce him up, and we black folks buy it. For instance, Bobby Kennedy was no good. No good. You only think he was good because you don't know. Remember Senator Joe McCarthy from Wisconsin? Bobby was his aide. He was the one that was digging up all that dirt on everybody during the Red Scare. That was Bobby. Americans are so fixated on the Kennedy glamour. Even black folks. We can't get trapped by what is not real. We can't believe in others. We have to believe in black solidarity. The point is, we can have help from white folks, but we can't rely on them. We have to organize ourselves. We've done so in the past, and we need to do it some more. In this section, I highlight ways in which blacks have organized and produced great outcomes. W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and the Atlanta Compromise. Here's something that may seem strange. At the same time that some white folks were making things tough for black people in the South, other white folks couldn't throw money at blacks fast enough. Most of the money had to do with education. Some of the rich folks giving out all the money, the philanthropists, did it partly out of the goodness of their own hearts. Some of them were church folks and were just trying to do their Christian duty. But some of them, especially the ones in the North, figured it this way. If folks in the South, including black folks, got enough education to get good jobs, they could pay their fair share of taxes. See there? With half of what goes on in life, if you dig down to the bottom to see what it's all about, you find money. With the other half, you find sex. But that's a different story. Here's how strange it was. After slavery came a dozen years of Reconstruction, and it seemed like a new day for black folks in the South, because there were federal troops ensuring our rights. Blacks could vote and run for office with little trouble, and there were even black senators and congressmen down south. Then came the presidential election of 1876. It was a close one. It looked like the Democrat Samuel Tilden had more votes in the Electoral College than the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. Some said otherwise because the vote in a few states was so close that nobody knew whom the state's electoral votes were going to. There wasn't a presidential election like that until 124 years later when George W. Bush ran against Al Gore in 2000. Finally, the Democrats said, okay, look here. Y'all can have the election, no problem. You just have to do us one favor. Take these federal troops out of the South. You know, the ones y'all got down here making sure blacks can vote and get elected to office. Let us deal with our black people our way. The Republicans said, cool. And that's how the Compromise of 1877 happened. Hayes became president, and just about the first thing he did was remove the troops from the South. And just like that, Reconstruction was over. Now here's the strange part. Rutherford B. Hayes, the dude who became president on the condition that he pull federal troops out of the South and end Reconstruction, that same dude later helped run a fund that helped a dozen schools train black teachers. Isn't that some crazy stuff? Even after the government pulled the federal troops out of the South, and even after blacks got chased out of Congress with white dudes in hoods 2 steps behind them, and even when some blacks were getting locked up just for looking white folks in the eye, while all that was happening, black folks were going to school. If they couldn't do anything else for them, poor black parents were at least able to send their kids to school. One of those little kids was young Booker T. Washington. He was born in Virginia in 1856 as a slave. Then, after emancipation, he went to school at the Hampton Institute in Virginia. That school was run by General Samuel Chapman Armstrong. And that's who gave old Booker T the main idea he didn't let go of for the rest of his life. It was all about work. If you were working, you were staying out of trouble. The more work you did, the better you got at it, and the better you got, the more money you made, and the prouder you felt. The prouder you felt, the more you stayed out of trouble because you didn't want to mess it all up doing some low-down mess. The more money you made, the more property you would have, and the more property you had, the more you would have to keep and protect. So the harder you'd work. For Booker T, it all started and ended with work. Booker T. Washington believed that for black folks in the South, which is where most of them were at that time, the key was to find work that white folks needed done. That way black folks would be useful to other people. And when other people needed you, you survived. Not just that, if black folks showed white folks we could work and be trusted, if we proved that our presence was good for white people, the whites might just let up on us and treat us like ordinary folks instead of animals. What kind of work did white folks need done? Farming and other manual labor. Stuff like that. See, Booker T was all for blacks getting educated as long as we got taught to do practical stuff. General Armstrong recommended Booker T to head up the Tuskegee Institute, a school in Alabama for black folks that got started in the 1880s. Booker ran Tuskegee for the rest of his life. It gave his ideas a spotlight. He thought the most important thing was for blacks to get themselves together economically. Racial equality, fighting for voting rights, integrating with whites, the way Booker T saw it, all that could wait. It was more important to work. You'd best believe white people ate that stuff up. Why wouldn't they have? They didn't have to change a thing they were doing, and black folks were going to help them. In 1895 in Georgia, Booker T gave a famous talk that was known afterward as the Atlanta Compromise speech. He said about blacks and whites, "In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the 5 fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress." White people clapped at that till they couldn't feel their hands. Washington told blacks in the South that they should forget about going somewhere else to make a new start. They had opportunities right where they were. He said, "To those of my race who depend on bettering their condition in a foreign land or who underestimate the importance of cultivating friendly relations with the southern white man, I would say cast down your bucket where you are. Cast it down in making friends in every manly way of the people of all races by whom we are surrounded. Cast it down in agriculture, mechanics, in commerce, in domestic services, and in the professions." You have to give old Booker T. Washington his due. What he was saying made some sense even if you didn't agree with it. Of course, now it probably won't surprise you to hear that not all black people saw things the way he did. Some black folks heard what Booker T was saying about doing what white folks needed done, and they said, "Later for that. The 14th Amendment says I'm a citizen. If I'm a citizen, I've got rights, and I should be able to do what I want. Forget about trying to do what the white folks need. That mess ended with slavery, or should have. Why have I got to try to be useful to the white man just so he won't treat me worse than he treats a dog? I've got my own life to think about. I need to be able to vote. That's my right as a citizen. If I want to spend my life studying philosophy or French or art history, I need to be able to do that. What I want doesn't have a thing to do with the white man." One brother who felt that way was William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. WEB for short. He was born in Massachusetts in 1868. Talk about a black man getting educated. After he got a degree at Fisk University, Du Bois went overseas to study in Berlin, then returned and became the first black person to get a PhD from Harvard University. That man had brains coming out of his ears. One of Du Bois's books is The Souls of Black Folk, which you need to read if you haven't. Du Bois didn't like what Booker T. Washington was saying, and not just because he thought black people should be able to do whatever we wanted. The way Du Bois saw it, if all you told black people to do was work, and work some more, you were making them into machines instead of people. Hard to say he was wrong, just like it was hard to say Booker T was wrong. In an essay called The Talented Tenth, Du Bois wrote, "If we make money the object of man training, we shall develop money makers, but not necessarily men. If we make technical skill the object of education, we may possess artisans, but not in nature men. Men we shall have only as we make manhood the object of the work of the schools. Intelligence, broad sympathy, knowledge of the world that was and is, and of the relation of men to it. This is the curriculum of that higher education which must underlie true life." Booker T and Du Bois, they were both right. The founding of the NAACP. In the 19th century, black folks couldn't win for losing. Things looked good for a while. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln announced the end of slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation, and the slaveholding states that made up the Confederacy lost the war in 1865. It was a new day for black folks, or at least it seemed that way. Reconstruction started, but was short-lived. Black folks didn't go back to being slaves, and we still had the legal right to vote because of the 15th Amendment, which got passed in 1870. But that didn't stop Southerners from harassing blacks at the polls and making us take all kinds of stupid tests before we could get anywhere near a ballot box. So blacks could vote, but we couldn't vote. Now, it wasn't enough for some white folks that blacks were prevented from voting or serving in office because blacks weren't slaves anymore. We were getting jobs that white folks felt entitled to. Whites didn't like that a bit. Plus, how could white folks feel that they were better than blacks if blacks were free just like them? Some blacks had even been congressmen and senators. White folks didn't like that either. They started getting resentful, and if they were the ones who had something to be were the ones that had something to be resentful about. They got so pissed off at blacks that they started lynching us. Between the mid-1880s and 1900, more than 2,500 folks were lynched. Most of these were black folks, and most of the lynchings were in the southern states, and those are just the ones we know about. After they finally started keeping track. It wasn't just lynchings either. Sometimes whole black neighborhoods got burned down. If word got out that some black person had done some white person wrong, even if it hadn't happened, the next thing you knew there was a white mob beating and killing the accused black person, torching his house. It didn't happen just in the South either. In Springfield, Illinois in 1908, a couple of black dudes accused of rape and murder, which they hadn't committed, were transferred from one prison to another before a mob could lynch them. That pissed off the mob so bad they burned up $200,000 worth of black folks' property. That was the racial climate at the time the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, got started. Folks today talk about climate change. Some climates change, some don't. In 1909, the year after the Springfield riot, a group of black and white folks decided that enough was enough. Matter of fact, the white folks were the ones who called the first meeting. Only a handful of black folks were involved at the beginning, including Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, and W.E.B. Du Bois. Still, it wasn't as if black folks hadn't been active in our own defense up till that point. In 1905, Du Bois and another black man, William Monroe Trotter, had started the Niagara movement to oppose discrimination and fight for black people's rights. But half the fighting the group did was with one another. They couldn't agree on which candidate to support for president or on other issues. Things got so bad that Trotter left the group in 1907, and by the time the NAACP formed, Du Bois told the handful of members left in the Niagara movement to throw their support behind the NAACP. Du Bois headed up the NAACP's magazine, The Crisis, which is still being published today. Now, hard as they tried, the NAACP couldn't get Congress to pass anti-lynching laws. There were too many racist congressmen and senators for that. And even if they weren't racist themselves, some of the voters in their district were, and those voters had long memories. The NAACP did publish a report, 30 Years of Lynching in the United States, 1889 to 1919, that became the talk of the land and helped lead to a decline in the number of lynchings. The NAACP had its national office in New York City and field offices in Boston, Washington, Detroit, and other cities, and then it spread out even more. In the 1930s, when the Depression hit and the whole country was suffering and blacks were suffering worse, the NAACP fought to get black folks jobs. The NAACP was also behind the cases that got combined in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954, which was when the U.S. Supreme Court decided that school segregation and the Constitution didn't see eye to eye. Since then, the NAACP has been involved in activities ranging from the civil rights movement to the fight to get more black characters on TV shows like The West Wing. The Great Migration and the Urban League. In the 19th century, most black folks in America lived in the South. Early in the 20th century, we started moving north and west. A whole lot of things made us move. Here's one. Right after the Civil War ended, the southern states, starting with South Carolina and Mississippi, passed the black codes. Among other things, that meant if you were black and got called a vagrant, you would get arrested. It was pretty easy to get called a vagrant. Black people had to have a written proof of employment on us at all times. And if we didn't, we could get arrested. We had to sign work contracts, and if we tried to get out of those contracts before the end of the year, we had to pay back the year's wages or get arrested. And not only did we have to work and prove we were working, but there were only a couple of kinds of work we could do. In South Carolina, if you were black and wanted a job as anything besides a farmer or a servant, you had to pay a tax, which most black folks couldn't afford. That way, white folks had guaranteed labor. Besides, who did you think you were trying to be something besides a servant, you uppity N-word you? What happened when black people got arrested? That's the beautiful part. We still had to work, but now we had to do it for free again, just like in slavery times. It was called convict leasing. Prisons would lease convicts out to companies for mining work and other dangerous, dirty jobs, and the convicts didn't get paid a cent. The only difference between that and slavery is this. If a slave master owned you, he didn't want you to die because he'd paid money for you. But if you were a prisoner and got worked to death, there were plenty more where you came from. And when racist whites weren't trapping you, tricking you, and arresting you, they were up and killing you. So if you were black and living in the South and all that mess was going on, the North and West would have started looking pretty good, right? The only problem, besides having to leave behind your home and everything you ever knew, was the white bosses didn't want to let you go. They had other plans for you. It's nice to feel wanted, but not like that. So you couldn't just walk into work one day and tell your boss, "I quit, going up north. Goodbye, you old racist dog, you." If you tried to do that, the boss would find a way to put you in jail or kill you. No, you had to get slick about it. Pretend you were going out for a drive, then hop on that train and not look back. So now you're up north or out west, along with the more than 500,000 other black folks who between 1910 and 1920 alone had enough sense and balls to hightail it out of the South. Things are better where you've gone to, but it's not like New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, or Los Angeles held a ticker tape parade for you and put up banners reading, "Welcome, Negro friends." Black folks still had to face the big three: segregation, discrimination, and poverty. In the only parts of town black folks could go to, we got charged too much money for places that were falling apart because landlords knew we couldn't go anywhere else. Racism in housing, racism in employment, racism in education. It was all there waiting for us. Just like with the NAACP, black and white folks got together and decided that that crap wasn't acceptable. For a while, it seemed that for every black person who had come north, there was a group trying to help him out. The Committee on Urban Conditions Among Negroes got started in 1910 in New York. Of course, we already had the Committee for the Improvement of Industrial Conditions among Negroes in New York, which had come along in 1906. And did I mention that the National League for the Protection of Colored Women had been founded in 1905? Eventually they all merged, but the new name, the National League on Urban Conditions Among Negroes, wasn't too much better. So in 1920 they shortened it to the National Urban League. That was more like it. And that group has been around ever since, helping black folks fight discrimination in education, jobs, housing, and healthcare. Excuse me. Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. Now, you can't really understand Martin Luther King Jr. until you know a little something about Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was Indian. For a bald little man with no teeth... Sorry. For a bald little man with no teeth, he was a mighty strong dude, leading the Indian people to their independence from Britain, which they finally got in 1947. He did it through what he called non-cooperation and passive resistance. Gandhi didn't want violence. His whole thing was this: Britain couldn't keep on ruling India without Indians' cooperation. So what Indians had to do was just stop cooperating. It was simple and beautiful. Don't hit anybody, but just don't do what they tell you to do. And the plan worked. Indians stopped buying the stuff Britain made, stopped going to school, stopped going to work, and went to jail until the jails couldn't hold one more Indian. Finally, the British said, "All right, enough. You win." A lot of people know that Gandhi influenced Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of nonviolent resistance in the civil rights movement. What a lot of people don't know is how many others Gandhi influenced. One group that admired his teachings was the Congress of Racial Equality, which got started in Chicago in 1942. Called the Committee of Racial Equality at first, CORE was an integrated group. One of the original members was a black man, James Farmer. The group came out of another organization, the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Like Gandhi, the group was dedicated to nonviolent action. It succeeded in integrating public places in the North through sit-ins like the ones that would become famous in the South. At first, CORE wasn't merely pacifist or nonviolent. Its members didn't believe in hierarchies either. In other words, nobody was really in charge. That became a problem when the group started to expand nationwide. Ever been to a meeting where nobody is in charge? It's cool and everything, until you try to get something done. Then you realize you've got a problem. Finally, the national organization took a firm hand and told the local chapters to fall in line. James Farmer became president in 1953. Things heated up when the group started being active in the South. In 1960, the U.S. Supreme Court had declared that segregation in interstate bus travel was unconstitutional. Court decided to test out if that ruling was being enforced, sending groups of blacks and whites together on buses headed south. Those were some brave folks. They were beaten by mobs, and the buses were set on fire. And the only thing the local police did was throw some of the riders in jail. Still, the freedom rides, that's what we called them, went on, and they worked. In fact, there was such an uproar over the Freedom Riders' treatment in the South that the Interstate Commerce Commission finally ended segregation of buses and travel facilities, including restrooms. Corps was involved in voter registration drives in the South, too. 3 of the Corps workers in Mississippi during the Freedom Summer 1964 were James Chaney, a young black man, and 2 white dudes, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner. For their trouble, they were beaten and murdered by the Ku Klux Klan with the cooperation of the local police. So the next time it's election day and you're too tired to make it to the voting booth, or you've got other plans, or you just don't feel like it, or you have some other lame excuse, think about the folks who got beaten and risked death and gave up their lives so people who look like you can cast a ballot. Doesn't mean you have to support the lesser of 2 evils. You keep doing that and you start to feel a little bit evil your own self. But whatever you do, get out there and vote, man. Thank you for joining me. Tune in for the next episode. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And we'll see you next time.